Thank you much for your time, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker, the Honorable Justice Phil Gilbert.
Thank you. President Mahoney and Chancellor Lane and Dean Davidson, and I know that our Supreme Court Justice David Overstreet is here. Where are you, David? There you are back there. Let's give David a hand. And all the distinguished current judges and former judges, it's a pleasure to be here. There's one thing you're going to know. My picture will never be on this wall down here because I had started law school before this school started. But I do have two law clerks, Peter Borkin, whose mother is here, and Eric Long, who is a federal magistrate judge in Urbana, Illinois. They were law clerks of mine, and their pictures are on that wall. And I guess I'm here in maybe a couple of capacities. One is chairman of the Board of Trustees, and on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I want to welcome all of you back to the school. Now, how many of you actually started law school that were not in this building but were in the barracks? Okay. Yeah. That's now you're giving away your age. But Dean Davidson wanted me to give a little history of this law school because my family had a little bit to do with it. My father was a state senator from 60 to 72 and was chairman of the Senate Education Committee. And he, along with the other legislators down here, were implementing Dwight Morris's vision when he came here in '49 and wanted to turn this school in from a teacher's college into a major research institution with professional schools. I can remember as a kid when Dwight Morris would come to our house and talk to my dad. Dwight Morris always went around with a note card like this, and he had listed on here the things that he wanted here at SIU. And one of the things was a law school. Now, back in the 60s, the elephant in the room was U of I. And U of I initially did not want any law schools south of Chicago other than them. But again, with my father's position as Senate on the education, chairman of the Senate Education Committee, U of I eventually dropped their opposition, and it went into the works for this law school to be in the late 60s to get approved to start in the early 70s. Now, my father just happened to go to law school with Hiram Lazar at University of Illinois. So my dad, along with other people here at the university, convinced Hy to come down here to start the law school. Now, he had been dean at Washington University for 12 years. And I can tell you, I don't know of any person that's been a dean at any law school for 12 years. That's kind of a record, and it doesn't happen too often. But he was from Thebes, Illinois, so it didn't take too much for him to leave Wash U to come down here to start this law school, the groundwork for it. My uncle, who practiced law in Chicago for 40 years and was also a friend of Dean Lazar's, came down. He retired, and when I came back from going to law school at Loyola, I got to practice with my father and uncle. But my uncle and Hy did a lot of groundwork in helping start this law school. When they weren't fishing, my uncle helped a lot. And one of the things we did was when ABA gave provisional accreditation to SIU Law School, one of the things they wanted us to do was to buff up our law library. Well, my uncle contacted his former firm in Chicago and another firm, and he and I rented a vehicle. We traveled to Chicago, and they loaded hundreds and hundreds of books and from these firms in Chicago, and we brought them down here to help supplement the library. And Morris Library still had a good library, but they needed, ABA required certain books and treatises and stuff like that. So my family had a little bit to do, and they were proud of it. And when I came back and started practicing law here, and and met some of the early law students like John Ryan and John Brewster and Jim Wexton, who is on the wall there. I started volunteering a lot of my time here, and I think over the 40-plus years that I've been here, and even this year I'm going to be working in judging moot court. But so it's, my family's proud of what they did in helping establish this law school, but it's been in great hands. Hy Lazar and the following deans, including Dean Davidson, are carrying the torch. Now, before I end my remarks, there's a couple other things I want to say. Many years ago, someone asked me, what was the best advice you received upon becoming a judge? And I said, well, it was January 4th, 1988, when Supreme Court Justice Cunningham administered the oath of office to me as a state court judge in Murfreesboro. And my father was robing me in front of a packed courtroom. And as he robed me, he whispered in my ear, he said, son, as you begin your judicial career, I want you to remember one thing. And I said, what's that, Dad? And he said, don't ever forget that you practice law. Well, I thought that was strange advice. How would I ever forget that I practice law? I've been practicing for 14 years. But when you stop and think about it, and some of you may have experienced this too when you were practicing before you went on the bench, some judges do forget that they've practiced law. That we as judges need to remember that at one time we were on the other side of the bench representing real people with real problems, and we expected to be treated with courtesy, dignity, and respect that attorneys and litigants expected, even if they didn't deserve it. And I'll be the first to tell you that there's times that I have to bite my tongue when I'm dealing with attorneys that don't know what they're doing, or especially pro se litigants. But we are public servants and representative of the judiciary, and we need to conduct ourselves with patience and temperament, even though it's hard to do. I remember we were talking about this today, and Pat Murphy and I just a couple weeks ago. He and I were co-counsel on a case, and we were in the midst of a motion argument before a judge who will go unnamed, and that attorney was making an argument that was not grounded in fact or law, and you could tell that judge was getting agitated. Finally, that judge had had enough, and he said, "That's a bunch of bullshit," and he gets off and walks off the bench. Now, true story, right, Pat? Now I may do that on my last day of work, but it was good advice my father gave me, because it's easy to forget that at one time we were on the other side of the bench, and we are public servants. The second best advice I received was from a federal judicial colleague of mine named Bill Beatty. And it was about 3 or 4 months I was on the federal bench, and I was talking to him about managing a federal caseload, because it's different between the federal caseload and what I had to deal with in the state bench. And Bill Beatty was a mentor of mine, I'm sure he was to Judge Murphy. And he had been a state court judge, and so I wanted to talk to him about how do you manage a federal docket, which is so different than a state docket. And we were talking, and he said, "Phil, the best advice I can give you in moving cases along in federal court is, if you're going to be wrong, just be quick about it." Because attorneys and litigants want a decision, and if they don't like a decision, they can appeal it. So I try to abide by that. And when something gets fully briefed and fully developed, try to make decisions quickly. So those are the two best advices I have. Now, I've practiced law for 14 years. I've been a judge for 34 years, 4 years on the state bench, and as of last week, 30 years on the federal bench. And I have appeared before many lawyers. I've worked with many judges, both in the state and federal system, including 3 stints on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, where I sat with Dick Posner and Frank Easterbrook, who were brilliant men, but they did not have any patience or temperament at all. They lacked in that category. But when I look at what it makes and we are blessed in Illinois to have wonderful judges in state and federal court. Not to say we don't have our characters. We have our characters, but we have wonderful judges. But there's one judge that I've served with no disrespect to anybody in this room, that checks all the boxes: legal ability and experience, honesty and integrity, judicial impartiality, temperament, able to move a caseload efficiently and effectively, and then making decisions, having the courage to make decisions that's true to the Constitution, the laws and legal principles, without regard to what criticism or consequences may come. And he's one of the finest judges I've ever served with. And I'm going to introduce him because he is your next speaker, Pat Murphy.